In my mind, this is common sense, and this is something that perhaps other sports should copy.
I think we've gone kind of full circle arc on this towards common sense, yes. I think, as you know, I've even moved my position over the years on this. I think, back in 2010 with the Equality Act, everyone put equality and they put inclusion and they put diversity first, but people forgot to put around some areas of life safety first and fairness first. And I think both safety and fairness apply to many, many sports. Obviously, for example, something like rugby or others where you'll have a huge weight and height advantage. But cycling, still an advantage. And there's very few sports in which there isn't a male-born advantage. In fact, the open category will also contain transgender men if they have taken testosterone, because the testosterone limits that were actually already in place in a number of sports would actually rule out transgender men once they've taken what would essentially be seen as performance-enhancing drugs, but actually a part of their hormone progression and transition. But actually, I think it is. It's about fairness in the end, and I don't think we can actually, even as a trans person, fight for kind of trans inclusion, no questions asked anymore. I think we have to err on the other side that actually trans inclusion in sport, you're going to have to justify it completely from the default of not being included.
Yeah.
I also think it's one of the sacrifices you make when you're trans.
Well, that's very interesting. So you think that people who transition should take the good with the bad. Fundamentally, you've made the decision to change your gender. You've made the decision to transition. And there will be, unfortunately, some things that you won't be allowed to do. Is that fair to say? Because there are a lot of trans activists who are furious about this, about being kept out of female sports.
Well, I do think, and I mean, I've been out as a trans person 17 years and going back 20 odd years, listening to older trans people, I think there was a greater acceptance that there was a sacrifice. I think the more recent trans campaigns have been far more kind of equality driven. And in fact, this kind of equality that is an absolute equality. Trans women are women, no questions asked. I think that's silly because at the end of the day, trans women are born male. And that the only way to actually transition is to acknowledge that initial birth as well. So as far as I'm concerned, it's like if we're doing maths around it, it's an approximation rather than a direct equality. And therefore questions have to be asked. And yes, trans activists are up in arms over it, not the least, Emily Bridges. And actually the language she has used around her anger at this, to me, is offensive. It's actually, she's used the language of genocide, the language of it being a violent act, of this is how it starts, this is Nazi. It's utterly crazy to use that language. It's offensive to others. Banning a transgender person from sport is not the same thing as putting someone on a carriage to Auschwitz.